The first thing they remembered was the silence, not the gentle quiet of a late night at home or the hush of a library, but the kind of silence that pressed against the skin, heavy and unnatural. A silence that seemed to watch, to listen, to judge. That was the moment they knew something was different, though it would take far longer to understand just how different. The story begins not with a battle or a triumph, but with confusion. One human, alone, standing in a place that was not Earth, surrounded by beings that did not breathe air or blink or fidget the way people do. Strange shapes moved in the half-light, too many limbs, too many eyes, yet they stood together as if nothing about this gathering was strange to them. The human was the only oddity in the room, the single figure out of place, the single heartbeat that did not belong. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then a sound broke the silence, sharp, deliberate, calculated. It was not a word in any familiar language, but something about it carried meaning, like the low growl of a predator or the warning cry of a bird. The others seemed to understand, shifting slightly, their attention now focused entirely on the newcomer. That was when the human realized what this was. A test. But why them? Why here? That part remained a mystery, and mysteries have a way of tightening like knots. The human tried to remember how it had begun. There had been a ship, or at least something that looked like one. They had stepped aboard because curiosity is a human thing, perhaps the most human of all things. Where another species might retreat, humans walk forward, asking questions even when the answers might burn. That decision, reckless or brave, depending on how you see it, had led them here, into the circle of creatures who spoke without words and measured them with eyes that never blinked. One figure moved closer. It was taller than the rest, its body marked with shifting patterns like ink in water. Its presence carried weight, not from its size, but from its confidence. It leaned in as though to study a rare artifact. And maybe that was what humans were here. Artifacts, tokens, something rare to be examined, to be understood, maybe even to be feared. Humans have always been underestimated, fragile compared to beasts with claws, weak compared to machines of steel, short-lived compared to species that measure time in centuries. And yet humans survive. They endure storms, cross oceans, climb mountains, and when every sensible creature turns back, humans are the ones who press on. That stubborn spark was alive now, in this lone figure standing before an audience that should not exist. The tall being's voice filled the chamber again. It was not a language meant for human throats, but still the human understood something within it. An invitation. Or perhaps a challenge. Humans are storytellers, explorers, survivors. But in this place, among these watchers, the human was none of those things. Here they were something else entirely. A token, yes, but also a reminder that humanity was stranger, tougher, and more unpredictable than anyone out here realized. The human straightened. The fear did not vanish, but it shifted into something sharper. Questions rose, unspoken but burning. What do they want from me? Why bring me here? And what happens if I refuse to play along? Across the circle, the other beings exchanged looks. Some tilted their heads, others flickered lights across their skin. They were speaking in their own way, deciding what to do with this fragile visitor. The human spoke at last. Just one word, steady and deliberate. A word simple enough that even these strangers might understand its weight. Why? The word echoed. It cut through their silence, through their calculations. For a moment, the chamber stilled. Then came a ripple of sound, almost like laughter, almost like approval. They had expected compliance, maybe fear. What they got instead was a question. Bold and sharp, spoken by a species that had built itself on asking the impossible. This was the beginning. The human did not know that the answer to that question would change everything. That it would lead to choices no one could undo. That it would push them into a story where survival would not be enough. They would have to become something else. And as the silence returned, heavier than before, the human realized they were not just an outsider. They were the variable, the unexpected, the anomaly no one had planned for. One of the beings stepped forward, carrying something like a staff, though its surface shimmered with shifting symbols. It tapped the floor, and the room responded, panels sliding open to reveal pathways that led deeper into this place. A gesture followed, unmistakable. They were being invited inside. It would have been easier to run. Easier to say no. Easier to cling to safety, even if safety meant nothing here. But humans don't choose easy. They choose meaning. And so the humans stepped forward. The doors closed behind them with a final sound, sealing away the last glimpse of the chamber. Ahead stretched a corridor lit with strange symbols, pulsing faintly as if alive. Each step felt heavier, more uncertain. Yet there was no turning back now. Somewhere in this place waited the truth of why they had been brought here. Somewhere ahead lay the answer to that single question. Why a human, of all creatures, mattered in a gathering of powers older and stranger than anything on Earth. And as the human walked deeper, their heartbeat steady but loud in their own ears, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were not just walking into a test, but into the kind of story that would never let them leave the same. The corridor stretched on, bending, curving, unfolding into a space that felt too large to exist. Shadows shifted along the walls, moving like they had a will of their own. The air grew heavier, charged with a pressure that prickled at the skin. And then, from somewhere ahead, came the faintest sound. Not a growl, not a word, something softer. Almost like a whisper. It spoke in no tongue the human knew, yet the meaning was clear enough. We have been waiting. The human stopped. The silence roared around them once more. And then, without warning, the lights overhead dimmed. The corridor plunged into shadow, and the whispering grew louder. The story was no longer theirs alone. That's a 1,000-word introduction, ending on a cliffhanger with tension and mystery. It sets the tone, builds suspense, and positions the human as the central unpredictable force in a strange universe. Got it? Here's the next 1,000-word continuation of your HFY stories. Stranger than usual, a token human spin-off. I kept the pacing tight, added deeper background context, expanded the mystery, and preserved the cliffhanger mood without giving resolution. It's written in a simple, natural tone and keeps the focus on the human perspective. The whisper filled the corridor, soft yet heavy, as though the walls themselves carried the voice. We have been waiting. The human froze, every instinct screaming to turn back, to demand answers. But there was no turning back. The path behind was sealed, and the creatures in that first chamber had made their decision clear, forward or nothing. The humans steadied their breathing. Fear has a way of shrinking the world, narrowing it to one step, one choice, one moment. But humans, in their stubborn way, learned to stretch fear into focus. One step became another, then another. The corridor seemed endless, its surface alive with faint, shifting symbols that pulsed like veins of light. That voice hadn't come from any figure they had seen. It wasn't the tall one with the shifting skin, or the one with too many eyes, or the silent shapes that had stood watching. This was something else, something deeper, and it was waiting. The human's mind went back to the last memories of Earth. The night sky, the stars above, the question that had always burned inside. Are we alone? It had never been enough for humans to stay in safe circles. They had built ships, probes, machines to stretch their reach. And somehow, one way or another, that restless push had brought this one human into the heart of something vast and alien. Maybe they had chosen wrong. Maybe they had chosen exactly right. The corridor bent suddenly, opening into a chamber that stretched far beyond what the mind wanted to believe. The walls curved away in impossible angles, bending light, bending sound. And in the center of the chamber floated a structure that looked like both machine and organism. It pulsed with a rhythm, a steady beat, almost like a heart, and again the voice. You are late. The human's throat felt dry, but the words slipped out anyway. Late for what? A silence followed, longer than before, like a pause of consideration. Then the whisper came again, though now it felt closer, like it was brushing against the edge of thought rather than the air. For your place among us, the human frowned. Place among them? It sounded absurd. What place could a fragile being from a blue planet have here, among entities that bent walls, carried staffs of shifting light, and spoke with voices that seemed carved into existence itself? But then again, that was the pattern, wasn't it? Humanity had always been the odd one out. On Earth, humans were not the strongest, not the fastest, not the sharpest-toothed. They were fragile creatures of bone and breath. Yet they survived because they asked questions, because they adapted, because they believed there was always more to see. If this was another test, then perhaps that same stubbornness was why they were still standing here, instead of broken or forgotten. As the humans studied the chamber, movement stirred along the edges. Shapes unfolded from the walls, beings that had been hidden, blending perfectly with the bending angles. They were taller than the others, their forms stretched and fluid, never fully fixed. Their eyes, if those were eyes, glowed faintly as they circled. Not hostile, not friendly, but watchful. One of them finally spoke aloud, though the words cracked the air strangely, like glass under strain. "Human, you will explain yourself." The demand carried weight, but the human felt a strange surge of defiance. Explain? To them? To creatures who had dragged them from everything familiar? To ones who whispered promises and offered no answers? Instead of bending, the human did what humans do best. They asked another question. "Why me?" A ripple passed through the gathered beings. Some tilted their heads, others shifted their shapes. It was not anger, but surprise. Surprise at the question itself. The whisper returned, softer this time. "Because you are not predictable." The words hit harder than the human expected. Not predictable. That was it, wasn't it? That was why humanity had survived in a universe that seemed determined to crush fragility. Not strength, not wisdom, but unpredictability. That reckless, stubborn choice to leap into the unknown, even when the outcome could destroy them. But if that was true, then what did these creatures want from such unpredictability? The structure in the chamber pulsed faster, brighter. The beings shifted slightly as though in anticipation. Something was about to happen. The human braced, unsure if it would be an answer or another layer of the same riddle. Instead, the tall figure with the shifting patterns from the first chamber stepped out from behind the pulsing structure. Its presence was sharper now, its patterns moving like tides across its body. It raised its staff, and the symbols along its surface flared. "Show us," it said. The human felt the demand settle like a weight on their chest. "Show them? Show what? Strength, fear, courage, humanity." The silence stretched, and the human felt the eyes, or whatever passed for eyes, of all those beings locked on them. Waiting, measuring, deciding. And somewhere, deep in the human's chest, a spark of anger flared. They weren't here to perform. They weren't here to dance for an audience that saw them as nothing more than a curiosity. Humans had bled, sacrificed, endured to reach the stars. To be reduced to a token was not enough. The human took a step forward, closer to the pulsing heart of the chamber. The air thickened, pressing against their skin. Every instinct screamed at them to stop, but they pressed on anyway. Another step, another, until they stood at the very edge of the structure. "Show us," the tall one repeated. The human reached out a hand. The surface of the structure was warm, alive, humming with an energy that tingled against the skin. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then light flared, bright, blinding, searing, and the human staggered back as the chamber erupted with sound. The whisper returned, but now it filled every corner, every crack, every breath. Yes, this is why. The human's mind spun. Images flickered. Worlds that were not Earth, stars burning out, fleets of ships vanishing into void. They saw fragments of struggles too vast to comprehend, victories too costly to celebrate. And through it all, one pattern kept appearing. A lone human, standing, surviving, refusing to fall. Then the vision snapped away. The chamber dimmed, the beings drew back, and the tall one lowered its staff. The silence returned, heavier than ever. The human stood there, chest heaving, mind burning with questions. What had they just seen? Were those memories? Prophecies? Tests? None of it made sense, and yet every part of it felt deliberate. Finally, the tall one spoke again. "You are not ready." The words cut deeper than the human expected. Not ready. Not enough. Not yet. The beings began to withdraw, their forms melting back into the impossible walls. The pulsing structure dimmed, its heartbeat slowing. The chamber felt colder, emptier, but the silence carried weight. The human wanted to demand answers, to scream, to fight, but all they could do was stand there as the last whisper drifted through the dark. You will be called again. And just like that, the lights faded and the human was left in shadow. But shadows don't stay still forever. Something moved in the dark, closer, softer, smaller than the towering beings. Something unseen yet familiar. And in that moment, the human realized they were not as alone here as they had thought. That's the next 1,000 words, keeping the suspense and layering more mystery without giving resolution. It provides context, highlights humanity's unpredictable spirit, and leaves the tension hanging for the next part. Here's the next 1,000-word continuation of your story. This section builds on the shadowy figure at the end of the last part, expands into subplots and perspectives, and deepens the main conflict without resolving it. I kept the human at the center of the tension and carried forward the suspenseful tone. The silence after the beings vanished was not empty. It had weight, pressing into the ears and chest, the kind of silence that hid things in its corners. The human stood there, eyes straining in the dim glow of the chamber, trying to separate shadows from shapes. That was when the movement came again, softer this time, as if whatever lurked beyond the edge of vision did not want to be seen. Every instinct screamed caution, but curiosity pulled harder. The human stepped toward the sound, careful, slow. The air felt different now, no longer heavy with the authority of the tall ones, but sharp, thin like the edge of a blade. A whisper. Not like the voice that had filled the walls earlier, but smaller, almost hurried, broke through. Stay still. They will know. The human froze. The voice was not like the others, less polished, less deliberate. It carried strain, maybe even fear. Who are you? The human whispered back, their voice barely audible in the vast chamber. No answer. Only more movement, closer now, circling. A flash of something pale, then gone again into the dark. Finally, the voice returned, shakier. Not all of us agree with what they want. The words cut through the tension like a spark in dry wood. Not all of them agreed. That meant division, conflict, factions among these strange beings. The human wasn't just a token or a test subject. They were a piece on a board already set with opposing sides. Before the human could press for more, the chamber stirred. The structure at the center pulsed once, faintly, as though it had caught some trace of the whispered exchange. The hidden figure retreated quickly into the dark, leaving only the echo of their words. The human was alone again, or at least, they appeared to be. Stepping back from the structure, the human thought about what had just unfolded. The tall beings wanted something they weren't ready to explain. They had tested the human, judged them, and then dismissed them as not ready. But now, another presence had revealed cracks in that certainty. If not all agreed, then there was a way through this puzzle. And if there was a way through, there was a chance to survive. The human pressed a hand against the wall, tracing the glowing veins of light. The symbols shifted under their touch, rearranging into patterns that almost resembled maps. For a moment, it was like looking down at constellations back home, but distorted, stretched into geometries that bent the mind. One cluster in particular seemed to glow brighter, pulling their focus. It looked like a network of pathways, corridors leading deeper into this place. Before they could study it further, the wall went dark, the symbols fading back into silence. The human pulled away, unsettled. Whatever this place was, it was alive, and it was watching. The chamber door opened then, without sound. A corridor stretched ahead, this one narrower than the last, its light faint and unsteady. It was an invitation, or maybe a command. Either way, there was no choice but to follow. As the human walked, memories clawed at the edges of thought. They remembered the first moments on the ship, or what they had thought was a ship. A blinding light, a sound like rushing water, and then nothing, until they stood in the circle of those beings. The gap between then and now was empty, as if time itself had been stolen. That blank space was part of the conflict, too. Whatever these creatures wanted, they had taken the human without permission, shaping them into something they had not agreed to become. The corridor bent, then opened again into another chamber, smaller than the first, but crowded with figures. Not the tall ones with staffs, but others, shorter, thinner, less imposing. They stood in groups, whispering in their own strange ways. The moment the human entered, the whispering stopped. Dozens of eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light, fixed on them. One of the smaller figures stepped forward. It carried no staff, no markings of power, but its movements were deliberate. Human, it said, the word strangely clear, though its mouth did not move. You do not belong here, yet you are here. The human swallowed hard, steadying their voice. I didn't choose this. The figure tilted its head. Few ever do. The crowd behind it shifted, restless. Some seemed curious, others hostile, but none looked indifferent. The human realized this chamber was not a place of judgment like the first, but something else, a gathering of those on the edges. Perhaps the ones who did not agree with the tall ones. The figure stepped closer. They see you as a token, a test. But some of us see differently. The human's heart raced. And what do you see? The figure leaned in, its eyes narrowing, its voice low. A weapon. The word landed like ice in the gut. A weapon. That was what they wanted. A tool. Something unpredictable to use against their enemies. The conflict was clearer now. The tall beings wanted to shape the human into something controlled, prepared for their design. But these smaller ones? They saw a chance to use humanity's defiance as fire in a fight that was already burning. The human's voice tightened. I'm not a weapon. The figure studied them for a long moment, then smiled, a strange, unsettling expression. That is exactly what makes you one. The chamber stirred with murmurs. The human stood still, caught in the middle of factions they did not understand, pulled into a conflict that had started long before they arrived. On one side, beings of power who tested and judged. On the other, those who whispered in shadows, eager to twist human unpredictability into something sharper. And caught between them, one lone person from a small blue world, forced to decide who to trust in a place where trust might be the most dangerous choice of all. The figure turned away, motioning for the human to follow. Come, there is more you must see. The human hesitated. Every step deeper pulled them further from the life they had known, further into a conflict that wasn't theirs. And yet the choice was no choice at all. Humans do not stop at the edge of mystery. They press forward. As they walked through another passage, the human caught glimpses of strange markings along the walls, symbols that repeated in cycles, as though telling a story. They showed beings locked in conflict, vast wars stretching across stars, fleets shattered, worlds darkened, and in the middle of the chaos stood figures small and strange, different from the tall ones, different even from these smaller factions. Figures that looked almost human. The human stopped to study one of the markings, tracing its lines. The figure in the carving had no details, only a simple outline, but its posture was unmistakable, upright, defiant, standing against something much larger. The human felt a chill crawl across their skin. The figure guiding them turned back, watching silently. The human whispered, almost to themselves, "This isn't the first time, is it?" The figure's eyes flickered faintly. No, the air thickened with tension. Humanity had been here before, maybe not this exact place, but somewhere in this web of conflict. The truth was larger than one person, larger than one moment. The human was not the first, and perhaps not the last. The corridor ended suddenly, opening into a chamber far darker than the rest. At its center stood a single object, tall and gleaming faintly in the half-light. The human approached slowly, every nerve alight with caution. It was a mirror, but not a mirror of glass. Its surface rippled like liquid, reflecting not the chamber, not the figure behind, but something else entirely. The human leaned closer, and there, staring back from the liquid surface, was not just their reflection, it was themselves, but different, harder, older, eyes sharp with knowledge of things not yet lived, And as the reflection smiled, slow, deliberate, the chamber plunged into darkness once more. That's the third 1,000-word section, building the central conflict. The human caught between factions, wanted as a weapon, discovering hints that humanity has been here before. It ends on another tense, unresolved cliffhanger with the liquid mirror and the altered reflection. Here's the next 1,000-word continuation, carrying your story toward the climax while keeping the suspense sharp and unresolved. This part pushes the tension to its peak, with the human pulled into the center of conflict and mystery, but still withholding the resolution. The reflection in the liquid surface didn't just look back, it moved differently, too deliberately, as though it wasn't bound by the human's own motions. When the human tilted their head, the reflection smiled instead of copying. When they stepped closer, the figure in the mirror didn't move forward but raised its hand as if in warning. The human froze, heart pounding. This wasn't a reflection at all. It was something else. Something that knew them, maybe even something that had been waiting just as much as the whispering voices in the walls. The chamber around them hummed, a low vibration that rattled through the bones. The figure that had led them here stood back, silent, watching. Its eyes flickered faintly, but it gave no instruction, no explanation. It seemed as though the test, the trial, the game, whatever this was, now belonged entirely to the human. The liquid surface rippled again, and the reflection spoke without sound. The words pressed directly into thought, sharp and unavoidable. "You do not understand what you are!" The human clenched their fists, refusing to step back. "Then tell me," the reflection's smile widened. "They will not. They fear what you carry. That is why they want to use you or end you." The chamber shuddered, faint cracks of light splitting across its curved walls as if the truth itself strained against the silence. The human's chest tightened. Was this what the tall ones had meant when they said not ready? Not ready to know? Or not ready to resist? The reflection leaned closer, its eyes hard and familiar all at once. "You are the fracture, the unpredictable spark. They cannot control you. That is why you matter." The words carved deep, and the human realized the truth had always been hinted at. The tall ones wanted something to mold. The smaller faction wanted something to weaponize. Both sides saw humanity not for what it was, but for what it could become in their war. And yet this mirror, whatever it was, saw the truth more clearly. The conflict was never about strength or survival. It was about control. The chamber grew louder, the hum rising into a deep thrum. The reflection's hand pressed against the liquid surface, and the mirror rippled outward like water struck by a stone. For a breathless moment, the human thought the figure might step through. Then came the sound, a roar like thunder, echoing through the corridors beyond. The figure that had guided them here stiffened, its eyes wide for the first time. "They know you are here," it said, voice tight with urgency. The human turned sharply. "Who?" The figure glanced toward the chamber entrance, its form flickering with unease. "The ones who fear you most." The mirror pulsed brighter, its surface alive with light, but the reflection was already fading, its voice slipping into thought one last time. "Choose carefully. Once you do, there will be no way back." The human staggered back from the mirror, torn between the lure of the truth and the approaching thunder that shook the air itself. The chamber door burst open. Figures stepped inside, not the tall beings with staffs, not the smaller faction whispering in shadows, but something else entirely. Their bodies were lean and sharp, armored with plates that shimmered like obsidian. Their movements were precise, unified, efficient, and in their eyes burned a cold purpose. The guide stepped back, voice low. "Enforcers." The human could feel the weight of those eyes locking onto them. No hesitation, no curiosity. These weren't here to test or to negotiate. They were here to end something. One of the enforcers raised its arm, and a weapon of light flared into existence. The guide stepped in front of the human, spreading its hands wide. "This one is not yours." But the enforcer did not pause. Its voice was a blade, cold and certain. "It does not belong at all," the weapon hummed, charging with lethal energy. The human's pulse hammered in their ears. Every instinct screamed to run, but there was nowhere to run to. The mirror still pulsed behind them. The guide's form flickered with strain, and the enforcers closed in with steps that felt like the countdown of a clock. The human's breath came sharp and fast. This was the breaking point, the place where choices matter most. They could stay silent, stay small, let these factions tear them apart. Or they could step forward, not knowing what the cost would be. The guide turned its head slightly, voice trembling with something like desperation. "Do something, anything, they will not stop." The human's eyes locked on the mirror. The reflection was gone now, the surface calm and rippling faintly, but the memory of its words burned. "You are the fracture, the unpredictable spark," and suddenly the path was clear. The human reached out, pressing their hand against the mirror's surface once more. It rippled under their touch, pulling at them, drawing them in. The enforcers moved at once, weapons raised, but the mirror reacted faster. Light exploded outward, filling the chamber, blinding everyone inside. The humans stumbled back, but the surface didn't release them. It clung like liquid fire, pulling harder, dragging them toward its impossible depth. Behind them, shouts echoed, orders, warnings, cries. But they were muffled, distant, like sounds underwater. The last thing the humans saw before the chamber dissolved into light was the guide's face, wide-eyed and unreadable, then silence. And then, not silence at all. The human gasped as they stood on solid ground again, but the world around them was wrong. The air was sharp, metallic. The sky was fractured, streaked with colors that twisted and tore. And everywhere, across an endless horizon, burned the aftermath of war, ruins of structures not built by human hands, fires smoldering in pits that seemed to stretch for miles, and ships shattered in the sky like broken glass. The humans staggered forward, heart racing. This place wasn't the chamber. It wasn't even the ship, or whatever it was that had first pulled them from Earth. This was somewhere else entirely. And the whisper of the reflection came back, faint but undeniable. "This is what waits if you fail." The human's knees almost buckled. Was this the future? A memory? A warning? Or had they crossed into another reality entirely? Shapes moved in the distance, tall, angular, armored like the enforcers, marching through the ruins with weapons raised. Behind them flickered smaller shadows, darting fast through the rubble, resisting, fighting back. A battle still raged, even here in this wreck of a world. The human's chest tightened. This was the heart of it. This was the conflict laid bare, not tests, not whispers, not factions in shadow, but open war. And somehow, impossibly, they had been dragged into its center. The ground shook under a distant explosion. The sky split with the sound of another ship falling. And in that chaos, the human heard it again. The voice. Not from the mirror this time, but from the very air itself. Choose, before it is too late. The human stood at the edge of ruin, torn between sides that all wanted something different, pulled by whispers of destiny they never asked for. The unpredictability that made humanity special was now the only weapon left, and it was demanded of them now, in this place where hesitation would mean being erased entirely. The sky burned. The ground trembled. The soldiers closed in, and the human took a single step forward. Knowing the next would change everything. That's the lead up to the climax. High tension, multiple factions closing in. The human pulled into the center of war with the demand to choose. The suspense is at its peak, but the resolution is still withheld. Here's the continuation. Another 1,000 words picking up where we left off. Introducing a second twist and raising the stakes while keeping everything unresolved and tense. It flows naturally from the last part, keeps suspense alive, and stays centered on the human perspective. The step forward felt heavier than any before. The ground beneath the human's foot cracked faintly, dust rising from the scorched earth. The ruined world stretched around them like an endless graveyard, a battlefield caught in permanent twilight. Smoke coiled into the fractured sky, ships burned in silent descent, and the distant clash of weapons echoed across the horizon. But what froze the human wasn't the devastation, it was the way the sky itself bent. Colors twisted and tore like fabric stretched to breaking. Every now and then a piece of the sky seemed to ripple, showing flashes of other places. Oceans, mountains, cities, even Earth. It wasn't just a battlefield. It was a wound in reality. The whisper returned, but this time it wasn't one voice. It was many, some sharp, some soft, all overlapping, each one threading into the mind with urgency. Do not let them close it. Do not let them open it. Do not let them use it. Do not let them waste it. The humans staggered, clutching their head. Too many voices, too many commands, none of them clear. Each one seemed to pull in a different direction, as though every faction had found a way to speak here, in this fracture of existence. And then came the second twist, the part no one had warned about. Shapes emerged from the smoke ahead. Not the enforcers, not the shadowed rebels. At first glance, they seemed human, walking upright, their forms familiar. But as they drew closer, the truth cut deep. Their faces were human but blurred, incomplete, like sketches half finished. Their eyes glowed faintly with that same pulsing light from the chambers before. Copies. Echoes. The human's breath caught. These were not allies. These were imitations, creatures designed to look human but lacking something vital. They moved in perfect unison, their expressions blank, their voices speaking as one. You are the anomaly. We are the correction. The human's stomach dropped. The enforcers had been terrifying in their precision, but this was worse. This was personal. These creatures weren't trying to destroy them. They were trying to replace them. The copies advanced, their steps steady, their eyes unblinking. Behind them, the battlefield noise seemed to fade, as if even the ruins held their breath. The humans stumbled back, heart hammering. You can't be real, the copies spoke in perfect chorus. We are what they wanted. What you were supposed to be. Predictable. Controlled. Safe. The humans shook their head violently. No, this wasn't what humanity was. Safe maybe, predictable never. The reflection in the mirror had said it. The spark of unpredictability was what made humans matter. And now, here stood the opposite. Shadows of humanity stripped of chaos, stripped of choice. The whisper of the true voices came again, fractured and insistent. Do not let them take your place. The copies raised their arms, and the air around them shimmered. Light flared, shaping into weapons made of the same pulsing energy as the mirror. The human braced, every muscle tensed. The battle wasn't just out there across the ruined world. It was here, now, and it was personal. But before the first strike fell, the ground shook violently. The fractured sky ripped open with a sound like tearing metal, and through it poured a surge of light so bright it cut through the smoke, the ruins, even the blank eyes of the copies. And with the light came ships, not alien this time, not mechanical monsters or angular designs of impossible geometry. These ships were rough, welded together, their surfaces scarred and patched. They were human ships. The humans' knees nearly buckled. They had thought Earth was gone, thought no one else had followed, thought they were the only one pulled into this impossible war. But now, streaking through the broken sky, came proof that humanity had not stayed behind. But the relief lasted only a heartbeat. Because what followed the ships was not hope. It was fire. The human ships opened fire on everything in sight, scattering blasts of energy across the battlefield. The enforcers scattered, the shadow rebels darted for cover, the copies turned their glowing eyes skyward. The ruins shook with the fury of human-made weapons. And the human realized the truth of the second twist. Humanity hadn't come to rescue them. Humanity had come to join the war. The voices screamed again, louder, more desperate. They cannot know. They cannot see. Stop them, hide from them, lead them, destroy them. The humans stumbled, covering their ears, though the voices weren't coming from outside. Humanity was here but not united. Which side had they chosen? Did they even understand what they were walking into? Had they come as saviors? Or as another weapon for the factions already tearing this place apart? The copies moved again, seizing the distraction. Their weapons flared, their voices cold. You are no longer required. The human backed toward the fractured edge of reality, the place where the sky bled into visions of other worlds. Oceans, mountains, earth flickering again in impossible fragments. The temptation pulled hard. Step through, and maybe it meant escape. Step through, and maybe it meant never coming back. But behind them, the sound of human voices carried through the chaos. Real voices this time, shouted across the ruins, urgent, panicked, alive. The human's chest tightened. They weren't alone anymore, not completely. The copies lunged. The human threw themselves aside, the ground splitting where the energy blade struck. Dust filled the air, choking, blinding. Through it, the human caught sight of one of the newcomers. A human soldier, battered armor, rifle clutched in trembling hands. Their eyes locked for the briefest second, wide with shock at the sight of someone already here. But there was no time for words. The battlefield roared, the sky split wider, and the copies pressed forward with terrifying unity. The soldier raised their weapon, firing into the blank faces, but the blasts scattered like sparks against stone. The copies did not falter. The humans scrambled to their feet, caught between everything at once, the fractured sky tearing wider, the alien factions fighting across the ruins, the soldiers from Earth charging blindly into a war they did not understand, and the copies, endless and cold, intent on erasing the one unpredictable spark in the middle of it all. The guide's voice rang suddenly in memory, echoing from before. "They will not stop." The human's breath caught. There was no way out. Not forward, not back. Only through. They turned. Planting themselves between the soldier and the advancing copies, hands clenched tight. Every nerve lit with fear and defiance. The fractured sky screamed above them. A tear in reality stretching wider by the second. Through it, Earth flickered again. Blue oceans, white clouds, green land. So close, so impossibly far. And then the voices came one last time, louder than ever. Not whispers now, but a chorus that shook the ground itself. Choose. Now. The battlefield froze in that impossible moment. Ships hung in the fractured air. Soldiers shouted. Copies advanced. The sky burned, and the human stood at the center of it all, knowing the next choice would not just decide their fate, but the fate of every side watching from the shadows. This section raises the stakes with the second twist. Humanity itself arriving, but as another unpredictable force in the war, while copies of the human appear as controlled replacements. It pushes toward climax without resolving the conflict and leaves the human at the most intense crossroads yet. Here's the continuation, about 1,000 words, that drives the story into its climax, resolving the main conflicts but still holding on to a final twist at the end. It flows directly from where the last section stopped, keeps suspense alive, resolves arcs, and adds one last surprise. The voices demanded a choice. And the battlefield around the human seemed to collapse into silence, as though the universe itself was waiting for the answer. The fractured sky quivered overhead, stretching wider, showing glimpses of Earth so clear it ached to look at. The copies stood only feet away, their glowing weapons humming, their faces blank, patient but merciless. Behind, the soldier from Earth shouted something lost in the roar of the tearing sky, but the desperation in their eyes was enough. The human's heart pounded, the weight of every side pressing in at once. If they joined the enforcers, reality itself might lock into rigid control, safe but dead. If they chose the rebels, the fracture would widen, spilling chaos across worlds until no one could stop it. If they sided with humanity, who had just arrived, they risked dragging Earth into a war it couldn't possibly win. And yet doing nothing was the worst option of all. The copies lunged, weapons raised. The human didn't think. They moved. Grabbing a broken shard of glowing stone from the ground, they met the first strike with everything they had. The clash lit the air in searing light, throwing sparks across the ruins. The soldier fired again, shouting, and this time, the blast staggered one of the copies, sending it skidding across the rubble. For the first time, the blank chorus faltered. The human pressed forward, driving the shard into the ground. The crack widened, light spilling upward in a column that split the battlefield in two. Everyone turned, the enforcers, the rebels, the soldiers, even the copies. The fracture was no longer a wound. It was a doorway, And in that moment of distraction, the human understood what the voices had been screaming all along. It wasn't about stopping one side or letting another win. It was about closing the fracture before anyone, enforcer, rebel, copy, or even humanity itself, could claim it. But closing it would mean being at the center when it sealed. The soldier ran to their side, grabbing their arm. "What are you doing?" The human's voice was raw, almost breaking. "Ending this. Before it ends us!" The copies surged forward again, faster now, their glowing forms crackling with rage. But the human lifted the shard, and for the first time they weren't just defending, they were in control. The light bent toward them, drawn into the shard like water down a drain. The sky rippled, the fractures knitting, the visions of Earth flickering as if being pulled away. The enforcers roared in fury, their ranks charging. The rebels screamed warnings, their leaders trying to hold them back. Human ships rained fire, the ground exploding in thunder. The battlefield became chaos again, but all of it seemed distant, muffled, as if the universe only cared about the figure at the center. The copies screamed as one, lunging for the shard. They weren't trying to kill now, they were trying to take it. Because if they had it, the doorway wouldn't close. The human tightened their grip and shouted, the word torn from their lungs like fire. "No!" The shard flared, brighter than anything before, and a wave of force blasted outward. Copies shattered into fragments of light, their voices silenced mid-cry. Enforcers were thrown back, their precision breaking into chaos. Rebels clung to the ruins to keep from being swept away. Even the soldier was flung to the ground, shielding their face from the impossible light. The fracture screamed as it began to collapse, pulling inward, closing on itself. For a moment, it looked like the wound in reality would finally heal. But then came the twist. As the light poured into the shard, the human felt it change, felt themselves change. The voices that had been whispers were no longer outside. They were inside, part of them. Memories that weren't theirs flooded through, endless streams of lives, choices, failures, triumphs. They weren't just carrying the shard. They were becoming it. The truth hit hard. Closing the fracture didn't mean sacrifice. It meant transformation. They wouldn't die. They wouldn't vanish. They would become the lock itself, the seal that kept every world safe. But it would cost them their humanity. The soldiers scrambled up, their face pale in the light. "Wait, you don't have to do this." "We can fight! We can win this." The humans shook their heads slowly, tears stinging their eyes. "This isn't about winning. It's about ending." The last fragments of the fracture spiraled inward, collapsing toward the shard. The sky knit together, the visions of Earth fading like smoke. The battlefield groaned as reality itself settled, the impossible geometry snapping back into something stable. The voices inside pressed harder, demanding to be let through, demanding to take control. And yet, at the very last second, the human did something none of them expected. They let go. The shard slipped from their hands, falling to the ground. For a heartbeat, the light faltered, the fracture holding open in a frozen instant. And in that instant, the human made the only choice that truly belonged to them. They didn't give the shard to the enforcers, or the rebels, or even the soldiers. They shattered it against the ground. The explosion ripped across the battlefield, light flooding every corner, tearing through ships, ruins, and armies alike. The fracture collapsed completely, the wound sealing in a thunderclap that echoed across the void. And when the light cleared, silence fell. The copies were gone. The enforcers scattered. The rebels crouched in stunned silence. Above, the human ships hovered without firing, their captains staring at the impossible end of the battle. And at the center, where the human had stood, was only a circle of scorched earth. The soldier staggered forward, eyes wide, searching desperately. But there was nothing left, no body, no shard, no fracture. Just silence. Then, faintly, impossibly, a whisper brushed through the air. Not many voices. Not chaos. Just one. "I'm still here." The soldier froze, breath catching, eyes scanning the empty air. They didn't see anyone. But they heard it again, this time in their own head. "The fracture is closed. The war is over. But I'm not gone. I'm part of it now. Watching, waiting, making sure no one tries again." The soldier's throat tightened. They didn't answer, not out loud. But in the silence of their mind, they thought one word: thank you. And for the faintest moment, they thought they heard laughter in return. Not cruel, not tragic, just human. The battlefield was broken, but the war was done. The factions withdrew, their purpose lost without the fracture. The soldiers from Earth gathered in confusion, wondering what they had stumbled into, what victory they had won without understanding the cost. But the human was gone. Transformed, a guardian no one could see, and high above, unnoticed, a tiny ripple flickered in the sky. Just for an instant. A hairline crack, so small it could have been imagination, and from it, a single whisper escaped. Stranger than usual, isn't it? That's the climax. The fracture closes, the factions scatter, and the human sacrifices themselves not by dying, but by choosing to become something new. The final twist leaves just enough unease, the possibility that the story isn't over, and that the strange, unpredictable spark of humanity lingers in a way no one can quite control. The silence after the collapse of the fracture lingered in a way that felt heavier than battle. The ruins stood quiet, smoke drifting lazily into a sky that no longer rippled and tore. Ships hovered but did not fire. Soldiers crouched among the rubble, glancing at each other as though unsure if the fighting had truly stopped. Even the enforcers and the rebels, sworn enemies locked in endless war, seemed stunned into stillness. The world had gone from chaos to calm in a single impossible moment, and no one knew what to do next. At the center of it all, where the human had stood, there was only scorched earth. The soldier from Earth walked slowly into that circle, their weapon dangling loosely in their hand, their expression caught between awe and grief. They had seen the shard break, seen the light consume everything, and felt the voices vanish from their mind. But the image of the human lingered, standing, defiant, making a choice that no one else could. The soldier knelt, brushing their fingers across the burned ground. It was warm, faintly pulsing as though a heartbeat lingered beneath the soil. And in that instant, they knew the human hadn't been destroyed. They had become something else, woven into the fabric of the sealed fracture, a guardian forever watching from the other side. Around them, whispers of confusion spread. Earth's soldiers regrouped, speaking in low voices about the weapon they had seen, the collapse they couldn't explain. Some of them looked at the ruins with unease, realizing they had entered a war that wasn't theirs and left it more bewildered than when they arrived. The rebels pulled back, no longer shouting, their leaders trying to understand how a single person had accomplished what their armies never could. And the enforcers stood rigid, their formation broken, their perfect control shaken. For the first time, all sides were equal in their uncertainty. The soldier finally rose, turning to face the others. "It's over," they said quietly, but the words carried. "The fracture is gone. You all felt it," the rebels murmured, uncertain. The enforcers shifted but said nothing, and the Earth soldiers looked at one another, unsure whether to believe it. But the silence of the world spoke for itself. The wound in reality had sealed, and no one could deny it. Still, questions hung in the air like smoke. Who had the human been? Why had they been chosen? And what would happen now, with the battlefield emptied of purpose? The soldier didn't have the answers. All they had was memory, the look in the human's eyes before they shattered the shard, the weight of their choice. That memory was enough. Days passed, though the ruins never changed. The factions dispersed one by one, the enforcers marching away in silence, the rebels slipping back into shadows, the human ships retreating to orbit. None of them claimed victory, because none could. What had happened was beyond their control, a reminder that not all battles are won with numbers or weapons. Some are decided by a single, unpredictable choice. On the quiet nights that followed, when the soldiers of Earth camped in the ruins, some swore they heard whispers in the wind. A voice, faint but familiar, threading through the smoke. It didn't speak orders or warnings anymore. It simply asked questions. Are you listening? Do you see what choice means? Do you understand what it is to be human? The soldier never admitted aloud that they heard it too. But sometimes, when the campfire burned low, they would close their eyes and feel it. An echo not gone, but watching. The presence of someone who had become more than one person, more than one choice, a guardian shaped by humanity's stubborn refusal to be predictable. Months later, when Earth's fleet prepared to leave the broken world behind, the soldier looked back at the ruins one last time. The fracture was gone, the sky whole again, but they couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't finished. Not really. A hairline crack might still linger unseen, waiting for the wrong hands to pry it open again. And if that ever happened, the human would be there, stranger than usual, but still human in the way that mattered most. On the long journey back through space, stories spread among the crew. Some spoke of a ghost, a figure walking the corridors at night, glimpsed only for a heartbeat. Others swore their dreams carried voices not their own, urging them to remember the spark of choice, the weight of freedom. A few dismissed it as stress, as imagination. But more than one soldier confessed that it gave them comfort to believe the human was still with them, in some way guiding without commanding. Back on Earth, when the fleet finally returned, no one knew how to explain what had happened. The reports were full of gaps, contradictions, and unanswered questions. Officials wanted clarity, scientists wanted data, leaders wanted strategies. But the soldiers who had been there only said one thing with certainty. A single human had changed the course of a war that wasn't theirs, and that became the story that lived on. Not the factions, not the fracture, not the endless battles fought in shadows. What people remembered was the choice, the reminder that humanity's strength wasn't in perfect order or overwhelming power, but in the stubborn, fragile, reckless ability to decide differently than anyone expected. For years, whispers continued. Pilots claimed to hear a voice on the edge of transmission bands, a faint laugh breaking through static. Explorers swore that sometimes, in the quiet of uncharted worlds, they felt like they weren't alone, always watching, always reminding them to choose. The soldier who had been closest to it all never sought recognition. They lived quietly, carrying the memory of that day like a private flame. And sometimes, when they looked at the night sky and saw the stars burning, they thought they saw a flicker. A ripple, almost invisible, like a reminder that the story wasn't finished after all. Because maybe that was the point. Maybe humanity was never meant to finish the story. Maybe it was meant to keep it alive, to pass it on, to remind every new generation that being human meant being unpredictable, untamed, and alive in ways no copy or machine could ever replace. The war faded into history, the factions forgotten, the fractured world left to dust. But the lesson remained, and in the quiet moments when doubt was loudest, people remembered the human who had stood alone in the ruins and made the choice no one else could. And sometimes, when the air was still, they thought they heard it again, that faint whisper, carried across the stars, choose, always choose, and that was enough. This closes the story fully, resolving subplots, tying back to the human-centric theme of HFY, and leaving the audience with a reflective takeaway that the true strength of humanity lies in its unpredictability and choice.